Hey guys, Absurd Being, Nathan here again. Now, this video differs from the originally scheduled video. Instead of moving on to contributions part 6, if you're watching these videos in the order I'm making them, I'm going to take a break from that and head into this book and just give kind of a rundown on what this book's about. It's called All Things Shining. It's written by Hubert Dreyfus and Sean Dorrance Kelly, and Hubert Dreyfus is well known as the kind of go-to figure for Heidegger, and after reading this book I understand why. And the reason I'm throwing this in now is kind of like an interlude between part 5 and part 6 of my contribution series is because what they talk about in this book bears heavily on what I'm going to talk about in the 6th video of the contribution series, specifically regarding the last gods. And I'm glad actually that I read this before I filmed that video, because yeah, it just throws that whole idea of the gods in Heidegger into so much clarity. Plus, this is a must-read, this book. It's just so good. I can't recommend it enough. If you only read one book this year, this is the one that you need to read. It's just so good, so relevant. It takes everything from Heidegger and just really illustrates how practical it is, how it's able to kind of to make a difference in our everyday lives, which is really what we're all trying to do. It's just such a great book. I can't recommend it enough. Read it. Anyway, I'm just gonna run through this video, giving a kind of a brief overview of it, just because a lot of, again, like I say, a lot of what I talk about in here I'll reference in the contributions part 6 video. So anyway, All Things Shining. I'm just going to read a quote from the first page, and let these authors tell you in their own words what they're trying to do. So, the world doesn't matter to us the way it used to. The intense and meaningful lives of Homer's Greeks and the grand hierarchy of meaning that structured Dante's medieval Christian world both stand in stark contrast to our secular age. The world used to be, in its various forms, a world of sacred shining things. The shining things now seem far away. This book is intended to bring them close once more. And so that's what this book's about. It's an acknowledgement that we've lost the source of meaning in our lives. It was structured. The world was structured for the Greeks in the times of Homer, and it was structured for the Christians in the medieval ages, and we've lost all of that with our modern secular scientific age. So they're just trying to orient us in this new age in a way so that we can find some kind of meaning again in a world that has lost all meaning. So they start out by talking about nihilism, the nihilism of our modern era, and they talk about David Foster Wallace, who is the author of a book you may have heard of or read called Infinite Jest. I haven't read it. Apparently it's a fairly daunting book. It's really long, and in it, or they talk a little bit about Infinite Jest and also about his last book, which was never completed, The Pale King. But they also talk about Wallace's approach and how he kind of viewed the modern day nihilism that we're going through, and the way he sought to rectify it, to remedy it. So he acknowledged, or he identified, that there's a sadness or a lostness in modern human life. We've just lost meaning. And basically the way he saw, or the way out, which he imagined, was through the strength of one's individual will. Just the way that we can bring the strength of our will to bear on any situation, and essentially create our own reality. So it's a very Nietzschean approach to it, where we kind of have become gods, and we are making reality conform. We're giving it meaning by just kind of brute strength. So that's his way out. This is the Nietzschean kind of free spirit approach. And they also talk about Elizabeth Gilbert, who was the author of Eat, Pray, Love, and she has she also identifies this sense of that we've lost meaning, but her remedy is a more passive one, where she says the creative force that kind of drives her is more like something which comes from outside, kind of passes through her, and she's just like a passive recipient of this. And they don't think, the authors think these they don't think either of these solutions are tenable, and that neither of them have found something here which is satisfying. Wallace's solution is, they think, is impossible. We don't have the strength to kind of force reality to match our will, and Gilbert's is incapacitating for the opposite reason. There is no task there. She gives us no task. We kind of just have to wait and hope, if we're lucky, that meaning will come to us from outside of us. The next thing they talk about is Homer's polytheism. So this is way back in the ancient Greeks. Also something which Heidegger was very interested in. And basically the essence of this chapter is that Homer's gods create moods. They create moods which they're not private moods, they're public, shared experiences. And the idea of these moods is that they illuminate a situation. They kind of align us in such a way that we're able to respond, we're able to act appropriately in a particular situation. So these moods that the gods create are they're not permanent, they're temporary. They kind of come upon us, and the best kind of life is one that is then in sync with these moods. And the moods are personified by the gods. So like Athena is the goddess of love. So anytime, or Eros, so anytime that there is that one is kind of caught up in a mood of love or affection or Eros, then this is the work of Athena. And the ideal situation, the ideal character, is the person who can align themselves with Athena and let kind of the mood that Athena sets work through them. So it also has that sense of not being the source of one's actions. So we kind of we're letting the idea is that we're letting Athena kind of control the situation. We're not deliberately doing things. The gods are working in our favor. They're working on our behalf through these moods, and that's the way that the ancient Greeks lived. That's how their whole lives, that brought structure and meaning to their lives. One of the important aspects of this way of thinking is that it recognizes our successes and failures are never completely under our complete control. And this is an important feature which we'll come back to again. And it's the exact opposite to the kind of enlightenment attitude that we have, where our own autonomy and freedom, we are the source of all of our actions and all of our thoughts. We're in complete control. This is a strong counterpoint to that idea. And they highlight these kind of things, this kind of passivity or this receptivity, by the way that they were fascinated by things that we have no control over, and in fact actions that we can't perform better by trying harder. And the paradigmatic example of this is sleep, going to sleep. It's one of those things where the harder you try to make it happen, the more you push it away. And so for the Greeks, for the ancient Greeks, sleep was always it's always described as kind of being something that we have to surrender to in order to accomplish, and it's something that's kind of visited upon us. So that's a crucial part of this. And I got a little quote to illustrate this. We are the kinds of beings who are at our best when we find ourselves acting in ways that we cannot and ought not entirely take credit for. And we'll return to this at the end of this video. So another thing to point out here, gratitude and wonder are the kind of guiding or dominating moods or attitudes towards life for the ancient Greeks, because they're not, theirs isn't a world where they're in complete control. They've acknowledged that things happen beyond our control, and so when these things happen, that the idea that the gods are kind of looking after them inspires this notion of gratitude and wonder at the things that are happening. Let's see, what else do I have there? One way we can imagine that. Oh, actually, let me finish this with a quote. A god, in Homer's terminology, is a mood that attunes us to what matters most in a situation, allowing us to respond appropriately without thinking. So that was the ideal in Homer's Greece, and it's what gave the ancient Greeks meaning. It's what structured their worlds. Now, they're not suggesting we can go back to this, but there is something appealing about this, and it's not that the gods were real metaphysical entities. It's that the idea that that moods kind of can take over us, take us over, can sweep us up, and we can be caught up in them. And when we are caught up in them, that's when we are at our best. And an analogy is something like sports, right? Where you're playing sport. If anybody who plays sports or plays an instrument will know that you're at your best when you're not thinking. As soon as you start to intellectualize everything, when you start to analyze things intellectually, that's when you start making mistakes. That's when you forget how to do things. It's when you let go, when you just when you distance yourself from it, when you stop trying to control it deliberately, that's when you play your best, whatever it might be. So that's the idea that they want to emphasize there with the ancient Greeks. And this idea of the gods there, it's exactly what Heidegger was talking about, and what he does talk about, and what we'll look at in Contributions Part 6. So they also run through a quick history of the West, and specifically the way that we have lost touch with the meanings the gods offered. And they talk a little bit about, I'm not sure how you pronounce it actually, I should have checked that, Aeschylus, the Greek playwright, and he wrote a play, a trilogy actually, the Oresteia, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But in that, he kind of presents a new vision. It's not entirely new, but he gives a new way of, for the Greeks to understand their lives and their world. And it's the vision that he gives is one that unites the Greeks together in the city-state. So this is where Athens becomes the focal point for them. And and what's important about this is that the Oresteia, these three plays, were what Heidegger will call a work of art. And they're a work of art not because they're impressive or they receive a lot of acclaim, but they're a work of art because they work, they do some work, which is, and the work that they do is they elucidate possible ways of being. They don't represent something, and we talked about this in Heidegger in the essay on the origin of the work of art. Works of art don't represent. The idea behind a work of art is not to reproduce something that's in, you can see in real life. Rather, it's to capture a way of being. And the quote I've got for this is the job of a work of art is to disclose a world, give meaning, and reveal truth. In this sense, works of art working can be thought of as sacred. And in this sense, they play the role of the gods, because that's what the gods do through their moods, through the Homeric gods, through the moods that they set up, they create, they structure the world, they give meaning to the world, they create those worlds. And so that's what works of art do. And so to the extent that they do this, they are also sacred. They play the roles of gods. So they talk about, they go on to talk about two kinds of people, reconfigurers, who completely reorient a society's values or attitudes, and completely change the way, or they outline a completely new way of being for a society or for a culture. And they say there have only been two in Western history. One was Jesus, and the other was Descartes. And these, but because these reconfigurers are so radical, their vision is so different from what's come before, by definition of being reconfigurers, that they need articulators. And these are people who will interpret their ideas and kind of distill them so that people can understand them. So Jesus was the first articulator, and he reorganized life around private, personal, inward desires. And the example they give is adultery. It used to be that if you committed adultery, you were guilty. But Jesus says if you even look at a woman, for a man, with a lustful eye, then you've already committed adultery. And he overturned the Hebrew focus on law. So he was more about following the spirit, not the letter of the law. And they also talk about his ideal of agape, love. I'm not so sure about that one, but anyway, that's the idea. Jesus did this, and he had a couple of articulators who came afterwards. So there was St. Paul, obviously. St. Augustine sought to try to marry the Greek philosophy with Christianity, and he did this with Plato, trying to do this through Plato. Aquinas would come later and try and do the same thing with Aristotle, and they think that both of these fail. The Greek ideas just can't match with Christian ideas, and some of the reasons they give are things like the Greeks were really about reason. The Plato, Aristotle, they were focused on reason and kind of universal truths, whereas that exists in Christianity as well. But a core aspect of Christianity is historical. The idea that God came to earth as a human being at a certain time and in a certain place, and that matters because people who came before that, they have no opportunity for salvation then, right? What it really matters to Christians that Jesus appeared at a certain time in a certain place. So this is the exact opposite of the Greek, Plato and Aristotle's understandings of universal truth and reason being transcendental, timeless. Christianity has this very temporal aspect and historical aspect, which is it's just so at the core of Christianity that you can't have Christianity without it. And then Dante, they talk about his play, The Divine Comedy, and the way he popularized Aristotle. And then they look at Luther, Martin Luther, and his Reformation. And the idea here was that he was trying to bring us, he was trying to kind of get rid of the Greek philosophy and bring us back into a more direct, personal relation with Jesus. And what he would do is, in his emphasis on the individual, he'll kind of set up what's going to happen in the Enlightenment, where we completely turn inward and see ourselves as kind of self-contained entities. And that's what Descartes will kick off. So Descartes' the next in their line of key figures in Western history, and Descartes was the second reconfigurer, and the way that he reoriented our understanding of ourselves in the world is he made us self-sufficient subjects, sites of inner thoughts, desires and volitions, standing over against also self-sufficient and meaningless objects. So he divided the world into two, these subjects and objects. And for the first time then, we're confronted with this question of how we ought to live, because we are completely self-contained. We, although Descartes still believed in God and thought, we lived in a Christian world, the emphasis now was all on reason and this thinking substance which we are, and we are completely different from other objects in the world, which are purely extension. And in separating us like that, we then have this responsibility or this power to bestow meaning on what we see, through our senses, of course, and it's not completely, we're not completely cast adrift. We're bound by reality, by the things, by the extended matter that's out there, but that gulf between us and things, and the way that we're different from everything, really just changes the whole picture, makes us more independent, makes us enclosed, kind of an inward focused. And Kant would continue this. Kant was the articulator for Descartes' reconfiguration, and Kant is the epitome of the Enlightenment. And that was where, and Kant famously said that the Enlightenment means finally taking responsibility for our own actions. So complete autonomy in this reasonable, in this reasoned, rational subject that we are. And this found its logical conclusion in Sartre, who was, we are completely free in every way. And so that's the kind of path where we've come to, and now we're dealing with that, the consequences of that, where we are completely free, we're completely autonomous. We live in a world that has been stripped of meaning. Things just are things, that whatever we decide to use them for, and at worst, they are just collections of atoms. That's how we're kind of encouraged to see the world now, just meaningless clumps of matter, and that's become the ideal. That's what they really believe things are now. So just completely stripped of meaning. So they talk a lot about Moby Dick, interestingly enough, and the way that they think Herman Melville, the author, has identified this loss of meaning, this nihilism in the modern world, and the way he also has spotted a way out through kind of bringing back this polytheistic polytheism of Homer in ancient Greece, but without the idea that we have, or the idea that these things, these gods, are actually metaphysical entities, that they really exist. So I'm not going to talk about that. I'll just let you know that it's there. And then we get to the final part of the book, which is the most important, and they talk about how we can use these ideas that they've discussed here to get some meaning back in our secular age. And they give us basically two ways that this can happen. The first is we can get meaning in physis, or phusis is the Greek word, and what it means is we've talked about this in Heidegger as well, I think, Introduction to Metaphysics. And the definition that Heidegger gives us, actually, I'll just read you the quote: "What emerges from itself, the unfolding that opens itself up, the coming into appearance in such unfolding, and holding itself and persisting in appearance. In short, the emerging, abiding sway." So that's the way Heidegger talks. And like I say, these guys, they kind of really distill it and make it accessible. So phusis or physis is what beings are, what being is. And for the Greeks, we saw how it was connected with their gods, this polytheism. But for us, the authors of All Things Shining, Dreyfus and Kelly, they analyze this with a sports analogy. So they talk about the four features that come to play in sports. First is temporary, the mood that catches us in sports is temporary. It's not a permanent state. Then they talk about the actual physis itself, which they describe as a whooshing. And that's the best way they can describe it, as opposed to Heidegger's emerging, abiding sway. But it's the same idea. The whooshing is like the way that we're swept up in something kind of greater than ourselves. So again, when we're watching a game of sports, it's that mood that takes us over is temporary, but it's like a wave. It picks us up and carries us along. It's also not unique to sport. We can feel this sense of phusis in listening to they talk about Martin Luther King's speech that he gave, and any kind of moment where you're with other people and everybody is kind of carried along on this wave of meaning. Everything kind of clicks, and that's what they're trying to get at here. Everything clicks for that time, and it can happen doing anything. And as the main focus here, though, is that you're surrounded with other people and you're caught up together. You become part of this movement, and it just orients everything, and everything just seems to make sense for that period of time. It's temporary, but it works that way. But they do point out that this idea, this meaning through physis, is dangerous because we give up control. We're not in control, so we can be swept up by an inspirational speech, but we can also be swept up by a charismatic dictator. And so they point out that there is that danger. So that this kind of leads on to the second way that they think we can achieve meaning in life, which is poiesis, which basically means to make. And they talk about this with the analogy of a craftsman and a wheelwright in particular. So they talk about the way that the wheelwright, in having to work with the wood to make the wheels for carriages, has to understand the wood. He has to know what wood what kinds of wood are going to be useful or suitable for different purposes. How he's going to use this particular piece of wood, how it will be able. He can best use this. What problems that there might arise because of this particular piece of wood. If there are knots in it or something, how he's going to accommodate those. And one of the key things here is that the meaning is in the wood. It's not it's not like Wallace was saying at the beginning. It's not something what Nietzsche also held. It's not that we impose meaning on the world. The meaning's there. We're just orienting ourselves in such a way that we're able to draw out, or that the object is disclosing its meaning to us. And so the quote is, "The task of the craftsman is not to generate the meaning, but rather to cultivate in himself the skill for discerning the meanings that are already there." And in addition to this, it's practical. It's embodied and in the moment. This idea of the craftsman crafting, acquiring a skill, and it's sacred. It's sacred in that it evokes an intimate kind of relationship with whatever it is you're engaging with. The wheelwright engaging with the wood, but also engaging with the environment. So he has to understand the different kinds of soil that are around, and how this will impact the trees that he cuts down for the wood, and the seasons. So that different trees are better or worse at different times of the year, in different weather, that kind of thing. So it's a more global kind of orientation. It structures your whole world. That's the idea here. It's not just isolated, but it brings meaning and cohesion to one's life. And I've described poiesis as making, but I think it's a little bit broader than this too. It's also like it's craft, but it's also the skill that's involved in acquiring a craft. So it's related to that, the skills that one needs in order to do something well, to perform well in a particular role. So those are the two ways that they talk about being able to find meaning in the modern age. The idea of being caught up in the phusis, the whooshing of the crowd, and also making something or acquiring a skill of the skill of like a craftsman, to be able to extract meaning from the world via a specific activity. They also talk a little bit about technology and the way that this is killing poiesis, and we've talked about this a lot in Heidegger. We talked about it in Contributions early on, and we've talked about it in other places. But basically, they briefly mention that technology makes everything accessible to everyone, and in doing this, it means that regardless of skill, anyone can do anything, and that's really the kind of motto of the technological age, which is fine. But as long as we realize that stripping away the need for skill also strips away the possibility of meaning as well, because it's where you're engaged with something as an expert. It's there that you develop the insight, and you develop that relationship with the task that makes it, that gives it, or that extracts the meaning from it. And so if everything's just reducible to an algorithm, do this, do that, follow this, click this, whatever, it strips away meaning. These actions lose their meaning, and they talk about the way that technology flattens both the world, because objects lose their rich essences, which Heidegger talks about a lot. They just become things. They're just things that we they can become really almost just utilitarian. A thing is whatever I can use it for, rather than us trying to look at the thing and getting some meaning from it. We just impose our own meaning on it, and it's useful for this, and then we discard it, and none of that has any value. It's all directed towards the end product, which is probably not going to be anything earth-shattering either. It's probably going to be, well, whatever. But it flattens the world, so it flattens things. Everything looks the same. Nothing has any depth, and it also flattens us, because we lose that special connection to the world, that sense of reverence, that sense of gratitude and wonder that characterized the lives of those who came before us. So they emphasize again that the danger is not technology, but the technological way of life. It's the way that technology opens up the world as being empty of meaning, as being just composed of things, just clumps of matter that can be used in this particular way. In the quote that I've got for this is, the appropriate response to this danger is not to reject technology per se, but to accept individual technological advances while preserving the poietic practices that resist a technological way of life. And one of what they talk about, one example they talk about is GPS, where now anybody can navigate. You don't need any particular skills. You don't have to be good at anything. All you have to be good at doing is listening and following instructions, right? Turn left here, turn right there, which is fine. But it has taken one avenue of meaning, the skill of navigation, where you engage with the world in a particular way, and the world is now structured in such a way that it has meaning for you. It's now been reduced to just a set of instructions: turn left, turn right. You can do it blindly almost. You can do it without thought, and it just has no value anymore. You know, you're just following instructions to get from A to B, but the journey's been lost. You know, and that skill of navigating has as something which connects you to the world and reveals the world in certain ways, that has been lost. Let's see. They also talk, which is quite important. They say you can't just choose to care about anything you like, right? So it's yeah, like not everybody wants to be a navigator, you know, a good navigator. So GPS is practical, it's useful, but we already do care about certain things, and all we have to do is examine ourselves to find out what these are. And this is again opposite to that Enlightenment view, that Kantian view that we know ourselves, you know, or else, I mean, what are the part of being a self is knowing or choosing what one wants, you know, being in complete control. This idea we're not in complete control. We have to discover what it is we like, and once we do that, you know, it may not be navigating. It's probably not going to be making wheels either, but there will be something that you care about, something that you're interested in, and it's that you can use that's one way you can extract meaning from the world around you, bring meaning, structure, coherence, cohesion to your life. And the quote I've got here is, "But to be an embodied being as we are, open to moods that can direct us and reveal the world as meaningful, just is to be a being who extends beyond what we can know about ourselves. The project then is not to decide what to care about, but to discover what it is about which one already cares," which is basically a summary of that. And the last point I have here is they talk about the call of the gods. And again, obviously, we're not talking about real existing gods or a god, but it's the role of gods as activities or ways of engaging with the world which disclose a world, which give meaning, which reveal truth. And when we do that, however it might be, whether it's at a sports game where everybody's caught up in the moment, or whether it's learning how to play a particular piano piece, or whatever it might be, those activities are world structuring, they're world defining. They can be opportunities for you to bring meaning to your world, bring meaning to your life, I should say. And the way they do this is through disclosing a world, through structuring just the way that you respond to, the way that you see things around you. And the quote I'll leave you with on this is as follows: "As autonomous subjects, we have closed ourselves off to the calling of the gods, and it is in this sense that we have banished them. The gods have not withdrawn or abandoned us. We have kicked them out. They are waiting plaintively for us to hear their call. Ask not why the gods have abandoned you, but why you have abandoned the gods." So that pretty much sums up everything nicely, I think. Really nice idea, really interesting idea. And like I say, I was just so thoroughly impressed. This is the book. I hope you can see it. I don't know if it's reflecting off the light there. But definitely check it out if you can. I can't recommend it enough. It just, like I said, it takes everything in Heidegger and just really makes it useful. Really brings Heidegger down from, you know, the clouds and puts it flat on earth in a way that's just completely, really accessible and useful. So I just wanted to just briefly put this up, just a little summary of what I've looked at of the book and what we've talked about here. So we've got the modern day meaning in a secular age at the centre there. We looked at modern day nihilism with David Foster Wallace and Elizabeth Gilbert. Then Homer's polytheism and how they operated. The gods kind of worked as moods. They set moods and attuned individuals to certain ways of seeing the world and being in the world. And then on the right side, the history of the West, which was how we lost touch with the meanings that the gods offered. And they went through Jesus down to Descartes. Those were the two main characters. And then at the bottom there, finding meaning in the modern world, we saw, we didn't actually look at Moby Dick in any detail, but they go into quite a bit of detail in the book. Definitely worth reading, really interesting. Technology on the left side, the way it flattens out the world and us, and responding to the call of the gods, deriving meaning through attuning ourselves to the world through either poiesis or physis. And so that hopefully has been interesting, and the next video will be contributions part 6, and we'll talk a little bit about the last god for Heidegger, the last gods. And but now I think with this grounding of how the gods worked in Homer's time, which is I think what Heidegger was getting at, and Dreyfus and Kelly have explained far better than I ever could have. With that, thankfully, they've done my job for me, and I'll just be able to cover this topic briefly in the next video. But anyway, thanks for listening. Again, read this book. If you don't read anything else, read that. And I'll catch you for the next video. Thanks again. See ya.